It was as si un door that had been sealed for his entire existencia had been unlocked. He could feel vibrations in the air now, patterns of movement he had never perceived before. It wasn't sound, it was something much deeper. It was awareness. Marina brought him to the cramped apartment she rented above the bar, a tiny space that smelled of stale cinnamon and desperation. She knew she didn't have much time. When she finally got the Wi-Fi to connect to her hidden files, she showed him photos of her mother. The woman in the image had Marina's same dark hair, the same defiant eyes. But there was something very wrong with those photos. They were taken at intervals of a few months, and in each one, Marina's mother looked progressively less human. Her skin acquired a grayish tint, her eyes began to glow with a deep red. In the last photo, taken just a week before her complete disappearance, she wasn't exactly a person anymore. She was something in transition. When Marina touched Cale's ear again, this time running her fingers slowly along the side of his face, she felt different vibrations emanating from him. They were like frequencies, as if he were transmitting information through his skin. She understood, instinctively, that the deaf man was actually transmitting messages through vibrations her body could pick up. He was communicating through the most primitive form of language possible. Cale pointed to the last photo and then to the symbol Marina had drawn in her notebook. The symbol was identical. He knew that pattern. His entire body stiffened with recognition. Meanwhile, in the depths of the city, in an underground temple that had existed for over 2,000 years, a ceremony was reaching its climax. The cult operating in the shadows had finally gathered the necessary elements. Marina's mother lay on a black stone altar, and her body was almost completely transformed. Her lungs had stopped breathing air days ago. Her heart beat at a rhythm that was no longer human. And in her blood, ancient magic was being woven, a magic that would create a portal that would free the primordial creature that had been imprisoned centuries ago. The cult needed only one thing, to activate the seal. And the only living being who could do that was Kel. Because Kel had been born from the only crossbreeding that could produce a creature with the power to hear through silence, to see through darkness,
to understand through frequencies that no human or ordinary vampire could comprehend. His father was Vorthazul, the vampire god, but his mother was something that should have remained forgotten. Marina discovered references to her in an ancient text, translated from Aramaic, a primordial creature known as the First Silent One, a being so powerful that she had been kept dormant for millennia specifically because her mere existence defied the laws of the vampiric universe. One of the cult leaders, a woman named Vesa, discovered Marina. She appeared in the stairwell to the apartment above the bar with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Vesa had been turned just 3 years ago, but had already risen to the upper echelons of the cult's hierarchy. This meant she had access to information most vampires would never possess. When she saw Kael, her entire face transformed. She recognized in him the reflection of his mother and immediately understood what had happened. Kael had awakened, and he was communicating with a mixed-blood human who had come into contact with Marina's mother. Complications were mounting. Obstacles that had seemed simple now twisted into labyrinths. Vesa offered Marina a choice. Surrender Kael, and her mother would be fully transformed, gain immortality, and live forever. Refuse, and her mother would be destroyed, her remains scattered in a ritual that would condemn her to eternal oblivion. Marina felt the claws of that choice tearing into her chest, because part of her knew Vesa was speaking the truth. And when Kael rose, when his form grew and his eyes began to glow with a light that had never shone in a vampire before, Marina understood that he had come to the bar that night not by chance. He had been guided, pulled. Marina's mother hadn't just disappeared. She had marked his path, left a guiding thread for her daughter to find him. And now that he was awakened, the gears of a much older plan began to turn. Kael ran through the city streets with Marina beside him, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't fleeing. He was pursuing something. The vibration that had begun when Marina touched his ear hadn't ceased. It amplified, becoming increasingly intense, like a silent scream echoing through his veins. He knew exactly where to go. He knew because his mother had left a map in his blood, a coded path his mind had kept dormant until the correct trigger was activated. Marina was that trigger. And now,
walking through the depths of the city's underground, Kael understood the horrible truth his own existence represented. His mother was not a victim of the cult. She was its creator. The first Silent One had sacrificed herself long before Kael was born, breaking her own seals, diminishing her power to create a vessel that could contain the magic necessary to keep the world safe. Vortazul, his father, had been chosen as a mere tool to create someone who could inherit both vampiric power and primordial ability. But there was something no one expected. Kael would also inherit spiritual deafness, a curse that would become a blessing, a weakness that would become a weapon. When they arrived at the temple, Marina smelt it before she saw anything. It was the smell of stale blood, burnt incense, and flesh transitioning between states of existence. The walls radiated an energy that made her stagger. Her mixed blood began to react violently, as if recognizing something ancient within itself, something that had been dormant her entire life. When her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw figures around an altar. And on that altar was her mother. But it was no longer her mother. It was something far more complex, far more ancient. The woman who had been Elena, Marina's mother, had transformed into a conduit. Her body was just a vessel, but what inhabited it was far more than a vampire. Vesa was there too, but now there was an evident hierarchy. She knelt before a being who radiated such absolute power that the very air around him seemed to distort. It was Kael who recognized him first. His own father, Vortazul, had descended from the celestial realm of the vampire gods to orchestrate the ritual personally. And when his eyes met Kael's, there was a moment of recognition, a moment of truth that shattered everything Kael had believed about himself. Vortazul was not there to prevent the ritual. He was there to complete it. Because the cult hadn't discovered Kael by chance. Vortazul had guided his creation through centuries, had orchestrated every piece of this ancient chessboard. He was not the guardian of the seal. He was the architect of his own prison. And Kael had been created specifically to break it. Marina saw everything crumble when she understood. The mother she had searched for 15 years was not being transformed against her will. She had consented. She had voluntarily offered herself as a bridge between worlds.
his appendages stretched like tendrils of black light, touching the temple walls and channeling primordial energy through them. Marina's mother, still lying on the altar, began to radiate a white light that burned the very darkness around her. She wasn't suffering, she was becoming. She was completing her true form. And when she finally rose, Elena was no longer human, not a vampire. She was a living bridge between two worlds. Marina then felt the blood in her veins recognize her mother, not through normal senses, but through something primitive and ancient, through magic that had been sealed in her body even before she was born. She understood in that moment that her vampire hunter blood didn't come from an ordinary warrior. It came from one of the first sealers. It came from those who had created the prisons that kept the primordial creations confined. And she carried within her the key to free herself from any seal, or to strengthen any. Kael advanced toward Vorthazul, and the ground beneath his feet turned into black glass, crystallizing with the heat of the energy radiating from him. When their hands touched, the explosion of power was so violent that the entire temple began to collapse. Pieces of the ceiling fell like meteorites. The ancient sculptures adorning the walls were reduced to dust. And in the midst of that chaos, Marina ran toward her mother, because she had understood something far more dangerous than all of it. Elena didn't want to be saved. She wanted to be destroyed, because her body, now that it had completely transformed into a bridge, was the last seal. If she were destroyed, the portal would open. If she remained alive, the portal could never be fully opened. And Vorthazul had planned this from the beginning. He had created Kael to destroy the temple, to defeat his earthly form. But the real prize was Elena, because Elena, as a bridge, had the power to choose which side of the barrier should fall. When Marina reached her mother and placed her hands on her shoulders, Elena turned to her with eyes that glowed with ancient compassion. Her mother whispered only one word: "Run." But Marina didn't run. Marina did something no one expected. She pressed her forehead against her mother's and let her sealer blood flow through that contact. The ancestral magic that had slept in her veins awakened completely, recognizing its own origin, and Marina understood how she had been born. Her father hadn't disappeared.
He had sacrificed himself voluntariamente so that she could exist as a bridge between humanity and the vampiric world. He had planned this too. Everyone was sacrificed on a chessboard that had been set long before any of them were born. But as Marina and Elena connected through ancestral magic, something changed. The energy began to flow in both directions. Instead of a one-way sacrifice, it became a cycle. Marina was offering her sealer power to her mother, reinforcing her seal instead of destroying it. And Kael, feeling this shift through the vibrations that now transmitted through the entire temple, understood what to do. He didn't need to destroy Vorthazul. He needed to imprison him again. He needed to seal his power within the same vessel from which he had tried to escape. When Kael touched Elena's body, his vibration didn't destroy, it sealed. All the energy that had been released during the transformation was channeled back into the portal, reinforcing the chains that held what was on the other side imprisoned. Vorthazul screamed. It wasn't the scream of a god, it was the scream of a creature that had lost its chance at freedom for eternity. And when the temple finally collapsed, burying everything under tons of stone and magic, Marina, Kael, and Elena found themselves in a strange vacuum. They had won, but the victory had come at a very high price, and none of them were sure what to do now. 3 days later, when the dust finally settled over the temple's ruins, Marina sat in a coffee shop above the underground, watching the city as if seeing it for the first time. Because, in a way, she was. Everything had changed. Not just the world, but herself. Her blood still vibrated with the ancestral sealer magic that had awakened, and she could feel the currents of the vampiric world as if they were her own nerves. Kael entered through the door in an oversized coat that covered his still not entirely stabilized form. He had spent the last few days learning to control the vibration, learning that power was not the same as control, that destruction was never the same as liberation. When their eyes met, Marina slowly raised her hand and placed it against his ear. That gesture that had started everything now carried a completely different weight. It was no longer a gesture of connection between strangers. It was a language between two people who had died and been resurrected together. Kael closed his eyes and leaned into that touch.